But for this trip, she did not help the pilot since she had no experience with this type of plane, so she was just a passenger. But this did give her the idea to do her own solo trips, which the first was in August 1928 across the North American continent and back. So, like, what, 2 months later, she's doing her own
Doing it
solo trips.
herself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Following this transatlantic trip, she became a celebrity and she was dubbed Lady Lindy because she looked similar to Lindenberg, I guess. And then also they called her the Queen of the Air,
I
which I
like
loved
Queen of the
that.
Air more. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you look like this guy. Like,
Yeah. Because she had her hair chopped short, which was like the style for female pilots. And she's wearing pants and,
yeah, I
but
don't
yeah.
know. They took her identity away.
Right, like Queen of the Air.
Yeah.
But she went on lecture tours for 2 years and she published a book and promoted lots of products like Lucky Strike cigarettes and a bunch of like women's clothing. So she was like a fashion icon too.
Influencer.
Yeah. And her celebrity status helped her finance her flying, and she also used her status to promote aviation and public acceptance of commercial air travel as well as female pilots.
I think I love her.
Yeah, I love her. You know, the more I learned, I was like, I love her. Why does no one talk about this stuff? Because, like, she did an article in Cosmo, I think, where she was talking about female pilots and stuff too. So, but at this time, she was engaged to Samuel Chapman, which was a chemical engineer in Boston. But she broke it off in November 1928 and eventually married George Putnam, which was her publisher of her book. So they got married in February 1931, which he was divorced too. So I feel like
Mm.
this is all like anti-traditionalism.
Yeah.
And she also believed in equal responsibilities for the marriage, and she refused to take his last name because of her celebrity status. And sometimes George was even called Mr. Earhart.
Wow. And all of this was happening like during the Great Depression.
I know. And like during well, one war, I guess, the earlier war, but yeah, the Great
Yeah.
Depression. Yeah, I guess that is true. I didn't think of that because she's can finance all of this stuff like during the worst.
Can I- She's a Nepo baby.
Yeah, kind of. I still like her.
I know. But also, I have to wonder if this might be a little off topic, but like how progressive everything is. I wonder if the um, Great Depression kind of reeled that back. Like if things got more traditional after the,
Oh,
because it was like the Roaring Twenties and everything was
yeah,
really like
that's true.
progressive, and then it kind of got rolled back.
Right. And people went back to more traditional values to survive.
Yeah.
That's true. I do think that's part of it. In May 1932, she did her first transatlantic solo flight. So she went from Newfoundland, landing in Northern Ireland after 14 hours and 56 minutes. So she became the first woman to fly solo nonstop across the Atlantic. And she did a lot of other solo adventures. So she flew from Hawaii to California, from LA to Mexico City, and from Mexico City to New York. And she also participated in long distance air racing. So between 1930 and 1935, she set 7 women's speed and distance aviation records. That's a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is very accomplished.
Yeah.
Although if you're like the first one trying, you
Which
set
one?
every record.
Oh.
I have to assume
Well,
you can defend it though.
I don't know if she was the only one to have well, maybe
How do we not know more about women's aviation in the 30s?
right, yeah. There were other female pilots for sure,
Right.
but yeah, I guess not that many, so maybe not that hard to set the record. But I don't, has anyone beat, I mean, I guess airplanes are so different now.
Right. That's not even fair. Like, you would have to go back and get
The classic
that,
plane. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Um, the next thing that she wanted to do after she set these records was to accomplish a trip around the equator. So this is where she started planning this trip that went wrong. Like started in 1935, she decided on her stops and she wanted it to be as close to the equator as possible. And she also got funding from Purdue University, actually, that
Aw.
yeah, that they built a custom Lockheed Electra 10E, which included modifications to include additional fuel tanks for this trip. And like definitely others had flown around the world at this point, but hers was going to be the longest distance since she was the closest to the equator.
That makes sense. Like, obviously, Mark and I have been getting into sailing, and
Yeah.
apparently, to circumnavigate on a sailboat, you have to go, like, whatever. You have to go as far north as you go, as, like, far south,
Oh.
so that you get, like, the certain distance. Like, it has to be, technically, I mean, to count as, like, a circumnavigation, you have to go as many miles as it is, like, around the equator.
Oh.
And
Yeah,
you have to cross, which is weird.
that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's like you can't sail. You can't sail straight all the way around like you could fly, so it's a little more complicated.
Yeah. I mean, even her path wasn't a straight line because she has to make certain stops. So there has to be land there.
Right, you can't just be like, I'm gonna stop here. Yeah.
Right, yeah. But she tried to get as close as possible. So her plan was to have a two-person crew with her flying and the other as navigator. So the first navigator she chose was Captain Harry Manning, who was also a pilot and a skilled radio operator who knew Morse code. So her husband Putnam and Manning did practices across the US, but Putnam was concerned with his error in navigation.
Mm.
Because, like, Earhart used landmarks to know where she was, like, by looking at different landmarks on the ground. But Manning was using a navigation fix, which, like, based on calculations and stuff, so it would be slightly off.
Oh.
Yeah, so, like, it was within the amount of reliability that would be, like, acceptable, but Putnam didn't like it.
Oh.
So, yeah, like they did a night flight test, like under poor conditions, and his position was off by like 20 miles, which the acceptable range would be like 30 miles. So he was within that, but Putnam didn't feel comfortable, so that he made her pick a different navigator, which was Fred Noonan.
Oh my god, it's Putnam's fault. What if, conspiracy here, what if he did it on purpose?
Yeah, I mean, as we go into it more, you could definitely think that he did that.
I didn't know there was so much to this.
Fred Noonan's supposed to be better navigator.
Unless he was hired to be worse.
Yeah. I mean, there's no telling how the other guy would have done
Right.
either. So, but yeah, that could be a theory that it was done on purpose. I mean, that is a theory that someone didn't want her to survive, but
Oh my god.
their first attempt was on March 17th, 1937. So they went from California to Hawaii. So they were gonna go east to west.
Okay.
So this included Earhart, Noonan, and also Manning, who was the navigator that was rejected. And then also this guy Mance, which I should have looked up his first name, but he was supposed to be like the technical engineer to help her.
Oh.
So this had four people for some reason, even though she had only wanted two at first.
Yeah.
But this this attempt failed anyway. So like they landed, but there was problems with the aircraft once they landed and it needed servicing, so they had to stay in Hawaii for 3 days. And like after that they tried taking off to the next stop, which would be Howland Island. But the flight never left with like the landing gear failing.
Oh my god.
Yeah, she thought either the tire had blown or the landing gear had collapsed, resulting in the propellers hitting the ground and the plane skidding on its belly, which also damaged the runway. But like some cited pilot error as the problem. including Mance.
He's paid to be the wrong. They sabotaged her.
Yeah. So while this plane had to get fixed, she decided to have a second attempt, which was from California to Miami on a different plane that they kept unpublicized. And they decided to start going east to, oh no, wait, west to
West.
east. Yeah, they
Yeah.
switched direction. And so on this flight, it was only Noonan with Earhart. And this is the one that was a disaster.
Oh.
But they did pick a different plane, which she wasn't as familiar with, and they didn't publicize it, and they didn't have the other two people on it.
And it wasn't the one with all the tanks.
Yeah, it was a different plane.
Interesting.
But I think it had similar fuel ability.
When did this one leave?
They left on June 1st for this attempt. So that was like from March to June.
I feel like she should have waited.
Yeah, I'm not sure how long it would have taken to do the other one, because the other one, like the propellers were damaged, the belly was
Well, right.
damaged.
It's like scrap it, but I don't know. It feels like it was very rushed.
Yeah, and I think there was some criticism with that first one, obviously, so they decided to try it like under secret.
Yeah.
But yeah, they left and they had stops in South America, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, and they arrived in New Guinea on June 29th, 1937. So, like, at this point, they had successfully covered 22,000 miles with only like 7,000 miles left.
Right. That's really not. Like, they were almost there.
Yeah, and most of this, though, would be over the Pacific Ocean, so less land options.
Yeah.
But on July 2nd, they took off from New Guinea with their intended destination being Howland Island.
She's not supposed to go there.
Right, yeah. Which was like Howland Island, I guess, is a very flat sliver of land. Like it's super easy to miss and is very tiny.
Ah.
So I'm not sure why they picked that.
I think because of the like, it's pretty direct.
Yeah, but if you look at I guess all the islands are tiny though, right? Like if you look at the map, there's a lot of other choices, but they're all pretty small. So I guess just pick
Right.
one.
She should have gone to the Marquesas in the South Pacific. I don't know how far she could fly, but
Yeah, because I guess it does have to be within a certain amount for the fuel and stuff too.
but oh, now I need to look at a map. I'm gonna criticize her flight pattern without knowing a damn thing. She could have gone like more south and gotten to French Polynesia.
Yeah, but she wanted to be as close to the equator as possible.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's
Right.
probably a big part.
Yeah, there's not as many options for sure if you want to stick to the equator.
Right. There are much bigger islands in between, just saying. Howland Island doesn't
Yeah.
even show up on a map.
Yeah, it's super tiny.
Maybe it's just that it had, like, you could fly there. Because you need space to land a plane, right?
That's true. It's very flat strip of land too, so like it wouldn't be hard to land if you could find it.
Right.
That's
Which,
the problem, I think. The expected flight time was 20 hours, and they left with 1,100 gallons of gasoline. And their last known position report was near Nukumanu Islands, about 800 miles into like the 2,200-mile flight.
oh,
So the U.S. Coast Guard was helping her coordinate to Howland Island. So they sent the ship Itasca to the island to wait for her radio signals. And the plan was for the Itasca to transmit a radio homing signal that made it easy to find Howland Island without precise celestial navigation. And there's also other communication devices to find her or for her to find them, like if that homing signal didn't work.
and yet.
Yeah. And also, the Itasca could use its boilers to make smoke, which would create a dark column of smoke that, like, Earhart would have been able to see over the horizon, so that would have helped her find